Have you ever thought about the relationship between honesty and greatness? Well, today's guest certainly has. Peter Kozodoy is with us today, and he wrote a book called Honest to Greatness: How Today's Greatest Leaders Use Brutal Honesty to Achieve Massive Success. We're going to talk a lot about what honesty means and why it's important for leaders to get real about how honest they actually are. Welcome to the Leadership Coaching Group's podcast. I'm your host, Liz Howard, an entrepreneur, author, and executive leadership coach. This is where I introduce you to the top experts that discuss the burning topics that leaders at all levels need to know about. My goal is to help you become a leader that you are confident others will want to follow. So, subscribe to the show, listen in weekly, and watch your confidence as a leader grow. Peter, welcome to the podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here, Liz. Thanks for having me.
We're going to talk about honesty and how it relates to greatness. This is just fascinating to me. Can you kind of unpack how honesty and greatness actually are interlinked?
I am happy to. And yes, we do live in interesting times, don't we? And, what's funny is we've had a string of scandals, right? You just take a look at the news, you probably crack open some fresh ones. And I think it's caused a lot of people, Liz, to feel like honesty's gone out the window. We're actually living in dishonest times. And one of the points I make in my book, Honest to Greatness, early on is that it's quite the opposite. The reason why we're seeing so many scandals in the news and the reason why we're talking about fake news and all this stuff is because we live in a transparent world. And in a transparent world where the truth eventually comes out, the premise is it's no longer going to pay to do anything but be honest and transparent. And so the question is, what does that mean, right? Because any of us who know a thing or two about honesty knows that there's such a thing as too honest, right? There's such a thing as offending people. In fact, some folks get really excited when they learn that I'm, the honesty guy, and they're like, "Oh, Peter, that's great. I'm really honest. I say everything that comes to my mind. I have no filter." And I say, "Well, that doesn't mean you're honest. It means you're just a jerk." So that's different, right? So it's actually helpful, Liz, to first define what honesty is not. And it is not a license to just say anything you want. It's actually not how we get things done for reasons that I'll explain as we go on. And one of the CEOs in my book makes a really good point. He says, if you're flying in an airplane and the pilots come over the intercom and they say, "Well, folks, I've never seen storm clouds like that before, so please put your seatbelts on. Not quite sure how we're going to land this bird." Is that honest? Yeah. Is it helpful? No, right? Honesty is only as good as the trust that it inspires. How do we lead others? How do we build culture? And the way to do it isn't just by being honest with people and being direct. It's also about being honest about them, about their own biases and fears and, ego and all of those things that we need to address because we're human after all. And we operate, out of our reptilian brains and we react emotionally to things instead of asking thoughtful questions much of the time. Although we all like to pretend that that's not true. It's just sort of the way of the world. And we see the manifestation of that, the effects of that and all the divisiveness we have in our country right now. And in the midst of all that, my message is pretty simple, that we need to redefine honesty. And then we need to realize that it is a technique. We can weaponize honesty as a strategy.
It sounds excellent, but from experiencing life and humans, interpretations of honesty, as you're alluding to, can be this wild spectrum. And I think that it can cause some tension if someone decides to leave something out, but they didn't lie about it. And they're sure to rub that in your face whenever you call it out, like, "Well, I didn't say it was this or that," lies through omission, some people might call them, or whatnot. So how does communication and honesty interlink? And I know this is probably a humongous question, but how do you find that level where you're not a jerk and you're not just basically saying nothing because you're so scared that someone's going to manipulate it? How do you find that happy medium?
Yeah. That's a fantastic question. And by the way, a question I wish more people would pause and ask and be thoughtful about. And so we need to play these things forward and ask ourselves, if I'm going to withhold information from someone or outright lie to somebody, in the end, if they find out that this is what occurred, will they get it? Will they say, like, "You know what? You lied to me and that was shitty, but I can see why." I can see why. I can see why that was helpful. I can see what you were trying to do there. Then that's one thing. If you think they're not going to be happy about it, then I would say that's not actually using honesty effectively. And much of this, comes back to how mature are we in our ability to understand how honesty and dishonesty plays into our lives. And only through understanding how to be honest with ourselves, how to open up our blind spots, can we make much better choices and really understand even why we lie, how we lie, that we are even no good dirty liars in the first place. Awareness of the problem gets us a lot of the way in and of itself.
So let's pause there, Peter, because that is fascinating. I think when I've observed some very, we'll say, cunning people, to try to have a little polish to the word here, but there are other
nice.
words. Yeah. I'm being nice right now. But they seem to really have this internal belief that their way of being a proverbial snake in the grass is effective, it's intelligent, it's whatever they assign to it, right? That's none of my business what they're assigning to it, but they've got these firm beliefs. So how do you recommend that a person even knows to look in the mirror to be like, hey, I've got some issues?
Yeah, well, and it's a blind spot issue, right? The definition of a blind spot, according to psychologists who invented what's called the Johari window, is things that you do not know about yourself, but that others know about you. And what happens is that creates a sort of friction. Everyone, you don't think you're that late, right? You show up, you get there, right? It's not a big deal. Meanwhile, everyone around you is like, this person's always late, and it pisses everyone off and it sucks, right? What that does is it causes a friction. It causes people to say, yeah, maybe we don't invite Liz. She's always late, and she's always got some excuse in that. And so the question we have to ask ourselves is, what opportunities do we lose by not developing our honesty muscle, our self-awareness muscle, let's step back and ask questions of this before I just like bull in a china shop through this thing. Now, on the other hand, we sometimes, I think, misclassify the snake oil salesman, to use your example. I've had it pointed out to me that certain leaders and even politicians are dishonest. So how can they possibly be successful? And I say, well, we live in a world full of honesty and dishonesty. And if someone comes along and they are clearly dishonest, they are consistently dishonest, and they never lie about their dishonesty, and that's just who they are, then we get into a question about, is that actually a version of honesty and integrity? I don't know the answer to that, but these are really interesting questions that I think we need to do a better job asking. And then the deepest, most important question is, do you want to be the person with the blind spots? Do you want to be the person that people talk about behind your back because you're unwilling to be self-aware and make the kind of changes that everyone wish you would make? I decide, I was that guy. Like, for me to write a book about honesty, Liz, this is very bizarre. Like, I was voted most likely to continue being a jerk in high school. Like, right. So for me to have to understand how to not offend people, where and when to be honest with people, the power of vulnerability and all this stuff. Trust me, if I can learn how powerful this stuff is, anyone out there can.
So what was your moment? What made you decide that you were going to dive in and do this rather uncomfortable work?
I lost $1 million client. Years and years and years building a multi-million-dollar Inc. 5000 marketing agency. We're on the fastest growing companies list in America for a couple of years in a row. And everything was just flying high. And we lost $1 million client, walked out the door. And at the same time, I was going through this sort of crisis, this quarter life crisis of turning 30 and having to just look inward and figure out, like, why was this bothering me so much? And I will try to tell you the short story of this, but at 17, there were two things that I knew to be true in my life, Liz. One was I was going to the Olympics as a figure skater. I was a very competitive figure skater growing up, skated for almost 15 years, the whole thing, mornings and off-ice training, the whole works. And the other thing I knew was that I was going to Harvard. I grew up outside of Boston. I had several family members go. I was going to Harvard, and that was just it. Right? Those were my two truths. By 18, it was clear I was not anywhere near good enough for the Olympics. It wasn't going to happen despite all my hard work. I applied to Harvard. Harvard sent me a nice letter back saying, thank you, but no thank you. Please don't call us. We'll call you. And that was devastating. But what was worse is, and I didn't realize this until my $1 million client turning 30 episode, I had never gotten over those. I had spent years accepting a second best version of myself. Like, well, I'm not going to be first best Peter. That ship has sailed. So I guess I won't try for any of the big things. And I was literally finding myself with these like weird self-limiting beliefs I didn't even know existed. Wouldn't have even believed if you told me at 24, like, Peter, it's probably, self-limiting beliefs. I don't think you're being honest with yourself about, where you are and what you're really trying to build and what your real goals are. And it would have been like, the hell are you talking about? Is my real goal to build this, do that? It's like, no. So I had to learn the hard way. And, that's a reason, Liz, why I'm so passionate about this work and why I'm so passionate about helping people understand that mostly they're not asking the right questions. Mostly they're asking a surface question about how do I achieve X instead of backing up and asking, what do I honestly even want out of this life? What do I honestly want my lifestyle to look like? Am I even happy? Do I even understand what happiness is? That's getting honest with yourself.
And quite philosophical. And, I actually love the way that you teed up your description of yourself, because I think a lot of successful leaders might kind of be raising their hand and be like, hey, this sounds a little bit familiar. Can you talk about how you passed through vulnerability? And that word is generally a dirty word to a lot of powerful people in business. How did you kind of exist in that space to cross over to this place where you decided to change?
So I was told, these all sort of happened around the same time. I was told to join EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, and I got into a forum. There's a group of other entrepreneurs, 100% confidentiality, and the whole point is to get super vulnerable with what's like really honestly going on with our businesses and personal family lives. And now I run forums just like this for entrepreneurs around the world. And it's an incredible program because we get to actually like say out loud the things that we know in the back of our mind might be an issue, but we're unwilling to admit to others and even often to ourselves. And it was an incredibly powerful and humbling experience to hear that all of these incredibly successful entrepreneurs who built multi-million dollar companies were struggling with many of the same things I was, the types of struggles that we just don't talk about as a society. Why? Because when you say, Peter, how are you? I say, oh yeah, good. Am I really good? I don't know. I mean, in our society, we've sort of conditioned ourselves to be kind instead of honest. And it's too bad because we miss a lot of opportunities to connect on such a crazy human level, like what really actually matters, that many times we avoid, and it's too bad. So, that was eye-opening to me because I learned two things. One, you can only use honesty to change your life by yourself, but you can't do it alone, which was really interesting. I needed other people. I needed a safe space. I needed the reflections of people around me to actually have a transformation.
How would you recommend that other people prepare themselves to accept that this isn't a unique situation, that to accept that, or even to ask a question of others to find a community? Because I think that can feel almost terrifying. You're putting yourself out there enough to say, am I alone, or am I with someone else going through this?
Yeah, it's funny. So I run these groups, right? And I just talked to somebody today who's like super excited. And then you could feel her talking her way out of it over the conversation. Because to your point, it's people intuitively get it. They're like, yeah, if I could just get my stuff on the table in a place that doesn't judge me, by the way, in a society where I can't say anything on, Facebook without getting judged, that's super powerful. But also, to your point, super scary. And the thing is, the question that I love to ask is like, what are you hiding from? Like who are you hiding from? And that was somebody asked me that, and I was doing training, coaching training. And it was like, I have no idea. What do we hide from? Who are we putting a facade on for? If you had told me at, in 25, 26, 27, I was going to come on and share how I got rejected from Harvard, I would have told you, I'm not telling anybody that. No way. But who am I hiding from? Like, let's be honest. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about how I got rejected from Harvard. They care about themselves, which brings me back to the real thing about the real challenge in being vulnerable, which is ego. We think that people give a shit about us, and mostly they don't. They care about themselves, which is fine. Everyone's entitled to that, and they should. That's natural. But the real honest question is, what does my ego prevent me from doing? What are the connections and opportunities that my ego and its self-limiting beliefs prevent me from doing? That, like, just ask that question and then go find the answer. Like, that to me is the path to understanding fulfillment.
Could you talk a little bit about an example of someone who has projected honestly effectively as a leader? So we talked about, how it could be ineffective if a pilot is saying, "Oh, I've never navigated this type of situation before." That might be a bad example. Do you have a good example?
Let me tell you one that's fun for everyone, because everyone can relate, and that is a story about pizza. So in 2008 or so, Domino's Pizza figured out it had a problem. Frankly, its customers are saying that its pizza wasn't that good. That's putting it lightly. Not only that, but they ran some tests and they put their pizza in their competitors' boxes. And people said, "Oh, actually, yeah, I like this. This is better." Same pizza. So not only do they have a taste problem, they had a brand problem. Big problems, right? And so the CMO very wisely said to himself, if I go and I tell all my fellow executives that the customers are saying this and that, they may not like deeply get this. So what he did was he polled the actual executives. What do you guys think of this? What do you think of this? And then he was able to come back with data and say, well, here's what you all thought, where we were at and what we should do. This is what our own customers are saying. So now we have choice. We can be honest about this or not. Not only did Domino's, update its crust and run a campaign, they actually didn't go that way at all. Instead, they put their brand new CEO on national television to run a television commercial where he basically said, folks, turns out that our pizza sucks, and I'm sorry, and you deserve better than that. And we're going to do everything in our power to make it better. They took cameras into their kitchens. They showed how they were working on the recipe. They took cameras into their discussions in the boardroom to show how they were talking about this and making changes. They took cameras out to customers and gave them pizza on their doorstep, said, do you think this is better? What do you think? And if you had recognized that strategic, brutal honesty in the moment and had bought Domino's Pizza stock, you would have had a 3,000% return over the next 10 years. And mind you, the core strategy here was going on national TV and telling everyone that your product is terrible. Honesty works because this is how we interact personally, right? For anyone out there leading a team, if you go to your team and say, hey, everyone, I messed up. I'm sorry. I suck. You deserve better. And this is what we're going to do. And I want to be really transparent about this and show you, and I need your help to make me better. What are they going to do? Kick you when you're down? Of course not. That's not how we behave as human beings. Instead, they're going to respect that and they're going to help you. And, I think the big message for a lot of organizations out there that don't get this is organizations now are essentially people. We live in a world where you can tweet at Pepsi. That's sort of a ridiculous idea, right? But it's true. And if Pepsi's a person, why shouldn't it take advantage of all the wonderful social, interpersonal ways that we interact in order to achieve outcomes?
So from a leadership and a business perspective, does honesty require, or is part of the definition of honesty then vulnerability?
I think at times, yes, absolutely. Why? Because of the same thing, right? If you open up to me and you tell me, something that's really vulnerable and that, what am I going to do? Be like, oh, well, thanks for telling me, Liz, you suck. That's not how we behave, right? What happens when we're vulnerable is someone says, gosh, I went through a similar thing and here's what happened to me. And now we're sharing and we're building bonds and building trust, right? All because we were willing to let our ego barriers down. That doesn't happen without being honest with people and about how they behave. Let's be honest about how we interact with each other. and what it takes to adequately lead a team. And we've all had good leaders and we've all had bad leaders. And I outline companies like the Ritz-Carlton in my book, and I talk about how today is filled with egomaniacal leaders. I say leaders, but I'm using air quotes. Can't see that right now. Authority figures who are, adopt a command and control style, and it's their way or the highway, and it's all ego and job justification and BS. Right? Nobody likes to work for that person. No, that's just the reality. And organizations like the Ritz, they do the opposite, or Quicken Loans, right? They do the opposite. They're managers. They don't do much. They're coaches. They're like, hey, let me know if you need anything. Bring me your idea. Oh, that sounds like an interesting idea. Should you do it? I don't know. Go do it and let me know how it goes. You're the boss. You know what to do. You're the frontline employee. You have control. I don't. But if you need resources, you need guidance, you want to bounce an idea, let me know. So different, right? This is a leadership coaching podcast, right? So you get this.
And so with that, let's offer a little coaching. If you had just one piece of advice to offer to a brand new leader, what would it be?
Two questions. I want to empower you with two questions that I want you to ask, and they are so universally applicable, and they are this. Is that true? And how do I know? This applies whether you're watching a news headline on TV, or your great Aunt Betty's Facebook post, or having a thought in your head, or an employee brings you something, or the boss says something. Just take a beat, pause, and ask, is that true? And how do I know? Because so often in our reactive states, we are operating on bases that are fundamentally untrue to begin with. And that's how it's possible to drift off course and have so many frictions that are so honestly avoidable.
Oh, so good. So good. Definitely let people know where to find your book and where to find you and all that you're doing. Where's the best place for people to go?
Sure. So come have an honest conversation. I'm at peterkozodoy.com, or what's easier is honest2greatness.com. That's honest2greatness.com.
Peter, interesting stuff. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate the conversation.
My pleasure. Thanks for being honest.
All right, guys, that is all that we have this week. Until next time, bye-bye.
Hey guys, if you're getting anything out of this show, please head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. I read every single one, and honestly, your feedback is single-handedly what keeps this show going. So go to iTunes and let us know you're listening. Thank you so much for being a part of our community.